Dr. Doug Rockey, who wrote the handbook for the Army and the Pentagon on DUs, had over 30 surgeries from exposure to DU. He's unable to join us because of medical treatment in D.C. at the VA. He recommended those, and the number one person that knows even more than he does is Dr. Christopher Busby. He is a chemist, physicist, so he understands both the chemistry and the physics. And he's one of the main advisors to the BBC for nuclear power plant incidents and disasters. Talking to him during the last break, he agreed that there's evidence of a cover-up. Meltdowns may have already occurred. He's with us for the next 45 minutes or so to look at this disaster and what we can expect with fallout. The government's saying now, yes, radiation will reach the West Coast probably tomorrow, but they're saying it's not a problem. Similar to what we heard in '86 from Chernobyl or from in the '70s with 3 Mile Island. Dr. Busby, thank you for joining us.
Yes, hello.
We've only got about 4 minutes in this segment, but what is most important from your expertise that we should know?
Well, the radiation from this plant, we don't know exactly how much there is. We've been plotting the plumes from the various releases. Very hard to know how much is being released, but it's almost certain that in my opinion, that some of the pressure vessels at least have been breached, and radionuclides will have been coming out. And there's also the other extremely serious problem is that there's over 1,000 tons of mixed uranium and plutonium spent fuel in ponds, which normally where they're stored just to keep them from heating up. And these ponds seem to have become breached and the water's come out. So that smoke that you see coming off in the photograph, in the pictures from the reactors, that smoke is probably radioactivity, pure radioactive particles boiling out of these spent fuel ponds. And we've got over 1,000 tons of material there, I'm told by my informants, which was being stored there but should really have been taken to a secure facility. So that's the most dangerous thing. Well, anyway, the stuff's is presently being released, and it is contaminating the North Island of Japan. There's no question about that. We've been picking up signals of increased radioactivity from Tokyo. Now, the problem is this, that the radioactivity measurements do not actually basically show the amount of radioactivity there, because an awful lot of the material coming out, the radionuclides coming out, aren't detected by ordinary gamma radiation measuring equipment like Geiger counters. So particles of plutonium, for example, and there is plutonium in these ponds, these particles cannot be detected by Geiger counters. They're pure alpha emitters.
And that's what Dr. Bowman...
detected by Geiger counters is an isotope of hydrogen called tritium, of which there'll be a huge amount. They're flooding these reactors with water, and the material is being washed out by the water into the atmosphere, and tritium is a form of radioactive water with a half-life of about 12 years. And also there'll be another isotope called carbon-14. So various isotopes that just do not get detected by Geiger counters. So if you get a small signal on a Geiger counter, it's not fair, as they have been, to compare that to natural background radiation. There's a lot of invisible stuff there. Well, you know all this stuff is invisible. So what's going to happen is it's going to, if nothing gets worse, there'll be just continuous releases of radioactivity from these, from the fuel ponds and from the reactors themselves. And when the wind, and of course, you know, the wind is generally westerly, although it will be moving around a lot, the plumes will eventually come across America, and then it will come across the Atlantic and come across to Europe, and like Chernobyl, they will go all around the world circulation. The concentrations at the moment probably won't be enormously high, but they will certainly cause an effect. And the reason, and the most important thing you need to know is that when the authorities say that these levels of radioactivity don't cause harm, that is a lie. That is absolutely untrue.
Doctor, we've got a break. Stay there. I want you to recap and repeat all that. Talk about some of the other isotopes that are being released. That's what Dr. Bob Bowman said 3 days ago, is that Geiger counters only pick up a certain spectrum of this. And we also know the Japanese, USA Today has confirmed, are covering up the true radiation readings just with the regular Geiger counters. And so the Pentagon also has assets there. They're covering up as well. Professor Christopher Busby comes highly recommended by Dr. Doug Rockey, who literally wrote the book for the Pentagon on DU effects. And he is a professor, a doctor of chemical physics. He is one of the leading experts in the world in studying the effects of radiation exposure, fallout. He's one of the chief advisors there for the BBC for his assessment of the radiation danger following the earthquake tsunami in Japan. He joins us for the next 40 minutes. And if you missed the last segment, he was talking about tritium being the #1 thing that history shows is going to be released from this facility, and that normal detectors do not pick this up. So, sir, let's start from the beginning. Do you believe there's a cover-up, explosions, the 600,000 spent fuel rods stored there on top of the facilities, the reactor #3, the Mark I MOX plutonium, uranium-based reactor, ejecting rods into the air, 3,000 feet, that's on record. The Japanese admit 2 of the internal containment live reactors have been breached. We're getting lots of conflicting reports. And the Pentagon, who's got assets all over the island, all over the Pacific, all over South Korea, is not giving us any data. USA Today confirms that Japan is not releasing the radiation readings from 2 of the regions or the states, the prefectures, as they call them. So please cover that spectrum first. Then let's get into the fallout and the fact that a lot of this cannot be easily measured. Does the government then have, that's a lot of questions, have systems to be able to measure that?
Right, there's rather a lot of things, but I'll try and cover those. The late Professor John Goffman, who was an advisor to the Atomic Energy Commission in America, a very senior man, said in the 1980s that the nuclear industry is waging a war against humanity. And this is another battle in that war. It's a battle for the truth. After Chernobyl, there was a consistent and continuous attempt to cover up the effects of Chernobyl, and this is still ongoing. The International Atomic Energy Agency took control of the World Health Organization in order to cover up the effects of Chernobyl, and they still are doing that. And you see the International Atomic Energy Agency talking down this accident at Fukushima, which is absolutely appalling. It's a catastrophe. The material coming out of the Fukushima site can be measured. I mean, many colleagues of mine are measuring increased radioactivity as far away as Tokyo and which is some 150 kilometers south. And we have been plotting using the supercomputer, the NOAA in America, where these materials from the plant have been going from the beginning. And the plots agree with the measurements of radioactivity that we have been finding in various parts of Japan reported. Now, the problem is this, that these materials, about half of the material coming out of that plant is undetectable with a Geiger counter. So if you get a slight increase in Tokyo and it says there's 4 times natural background, what happens is that the nuclear industry stooges and the IAEA and the people who are trying to cover up the seriousness...
They prey on ignorance.
What they do is they say that this is acceptable because the limits are acceptable under the current risk model. But what you have to realize is that the current risk model is just completely wrong. It relates to external radiation exposure, like standing in front of the outside in the sun or being X-rayed or whatever, but it doesn't relate to internal radiation. And I'm sure you know from what Doug Rockey has been telling you that it's the internal radiation effects of uranium particles which are responsible for all these terrible things that are happening in Iraq and to the Gulf War veterans. And the same situation is developing here. The smoke that you see coming off in the pictures from those reactors, from the Fukushima reactors and from the fuel ponds where they're overheating and boiling, is smoke consisting of radioactive particles. These particles are invisible once they get into the air and they float about the place. They're not detected at all by Geiger counters because they are alpha emitters. In the case of tritium, it's a liquid gas, just like water, and it's a beta emitter, not detected either by Geiger counters. So if there's a little increase in the millisieverts that are being measured in some place, you may be sure that associated with that is a very large number of very small particles that you will be inhaling, and that will certainly cause a significant increase in ill health, cancer, congenital malformations, a whole range of illnesses, the same ones that we saw after Chernobyl. Now, what will happen is there'll be a cover-up after Fukushima. People will be dying all over the place there from cancer and other diseases, and they'll say, oh, well, it's a result of exposure to the tsunami, or the figures are wrong, or whatever. The nuclear industry will make some way in which they can continue with their operation, which is basically polishing off the human race in small, bit by bit.
Doctor, I made the statement yesterday, what is giant profits worth if your children die of cancer? What is the whole world worth if you lose your soul?
I agree with you. And it's worse than that, because I've been studying in this regard the health effects in Iraq and in the Middle East, and those depleted uranium particles which float around the world are most concentrated in that area. And a study was carried out a year or two ago in Jerusalem, which showed that the sperm count in the Israeli men was falling rapidly, and these people predicted, in this scientific paper, they predicted that if this continued at the same rate, by the year 2020, there would be no more Israeli people. It would actually finish off the Israeli people, because they would be completely infertile. And this is a consequence, I believe, of the releases of these radionuclides, in this particular case, uranium in the Middle East. But now we have more radionuclides, and since 1955, when they started atomic testing, right through to Chernobyl and the releases from nuclear power stations, which we know cause childhood leukemia, these are, if you like, just the outward signs of something that's happening to the genetic makeup of the human race, and the fertility will go down and down and down. There'll be more and more cancers, and eventually we will have polished ourselves off. And all because the nuclear industry wants to make money, and people invest in uranium shares, and they're determined to ensure that their uranium shares don't disappear, which of course they will do. If the nuclear industry is knocked on the head as a result of this disaster at Fukushima, the uranium shares will just turn into dust in people's hands.
Doctor, let me back up what you're saying here. I've seen numbers in Western Europe and the maps, as you pointed out, major studies, not just in Israel, but in Western Europe, France, the United States, Canada, who have a lot of nuclear reactors, Japan. We see an 85 to 87% sperm fertility drop. The sperm don't have tails. They don't have proper heads. Their genetics are very seriously damaged. And CBS News reported a few months ago, all over Tennessee, Texas, wherever they've had these big nuclear weapons production facilities or the rod production facilities, clearly it's leaking into the water. And that's another reason, not just the 500 plus above air test done, 300 of which were done by the U.S. Themselves, that this is a clear connection, and that they know that radioactive isotopes directly attack the sperm production centers in the male, the testicles. And here's another example. Pickering nuclear plant leaking radioactive water, AFP, and they say they released radioactive water into the lake in Canada, in Ontario, but they say this is not a problem. I mean, it's just ongoing. These people are killing us.
Well, you have to ask yourself why. I mean, are they just stupid, or is it perhaps, and there are people who believe that this is some method of trying to control the number of people on Earth. My own feeling is it's not that. I think they are just stupid. I've met these people at the very highest level on government committees. They have a very curious way of seeing the world. They try to see the world through mathematics. That's the problem. And if you see the world through mathematics, you have to exclude all the second-order observations. Mathematics you can only deal with rather simple problems.
They're doing one-dimensional mathematics.
You're right. They don't do joined-up thinking. And in fact, I met a neurophysiologist, very famous neurophysiologist, a few months ago, who said that the problem with the modern world is that it is driven by scientists who only use their left brain. And the left brain thinkers are very good at looking at very small, disconnected problems, but they don't seem to be able to add all of these things together to get to any reasonable conclusion. Physics is like that, What it does is it tries to isolate problems in the laboratory and take away all the second-order effects and look at them under a microscope and then come to some conclusions. But the problem is that you can't then put all those facts back together and get back to reality.
Well, reality, as you know, Doctor, and the globalists even admit this is one of the problems with their system. They're looking at one simple system and the effect that that's going to have, and not all the butterfly effects and endless ripple effects as it connects into everything else. But you give the example of the sperm count in Israel alone. I mean, this is a fact, and it's just like Israel using DU in Lebanon 4 years ago, even though the wind is mainly blowing south, right back on them. I mean, this is like a gun where you pull the trigger and it kills your enemy, but fires a delayed bullet right back at you.